A dance show, a secret love. The studio lights burned brighter than the sun, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Tashi inhaled deeply, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of nerves and anticipation. This was the moment he had dreamed of since childhood in the hills of Arunachal, where he had first learned to dance by mimicking the sway of bamboo groves and the pulse of festival drums. His village was small, tucked between mountains, where evenings were filled with the sound of cicadas and the laughter of children chasing fireflies. Dance had been his secret language, a way to express what words could not. Now, far from home, he stood on the threshold of a reality show that promised fame, recognition, and perhaps something more, something he couldn't yet name. The other contestants buzzed around him, stretching, rehearsing, whispering strategies. Some were seasoned performers from big cities, their confidence radiating like neon lights. Tashi tied the laces of his dance shoes with deliberate care, grounding himself in the ritual. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear of dancing but from the weight of being seen. Cameras were everywhere, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. He had always danced for himself, for the joy of movement, but now every step would be judged, dissected, broadcast to millions. The thought was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. The door opened, and silence rippled through the room. Rohan Mehta entered. The producer, the architect of the show, the man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before rain. Tall, poised, with a presence that commanded attention without effort, Rohan moved with the calm authority of someone who shaped worlds behind the scenes. His gaze swept across the contestants, sharp yet unreadable, until it landed briefly on Tashi. In that fleeting moment, Tashi felt something shift inside him, as though the spotlight had turned unexpectedly toward his soul. He looked away quickly, embarrassed by the sudden heat in his chest, but the sensation lingered like a secret melody. The auditions began. One by one, dancers stepped forward, pouring their bodies into rhythm, their sweat into ambition. Some dazzled with acrobatics, others with precision, each trying to carve a place in the spotlight. Tashi watched, absorbing the energy, the competition, the hunger. He admired their skill but reminded himself that his strength lay elsewhere, in storytelling through movement, in weaving emotion into every gesture. When his turn came, he walked to the center, the floor beneath him humming with possibility. The music started, a fusion of traditional beats and modern bass, and Tashi let go. His body became a story, each movement a sentence, each leap a declaration. He danced not just to impress but to confess, to reveal the boy who had grown up chasing fireflies in the hills, who had turned loneliness into choreography, who now stood here daring to be seen. The rhythm carried him higher, faster, until he was no longer aware of the cameras or the judges. He was back in his village, under the stars, dancing for the spirits of the forest. He was in the city, proving to himself that he belonged. He was everywhere and nowhere, suspended in the purity of motion. When the music ended, silence followed. Then applause, scattered at first, then swelling. Tashi bowed, his heart racing, sweat dripping down his temples. He glanced toward Rohan, who stood at the edge, arms folded, expression unreadable. It wasn't approval, not exactly. It was attention, focused and intent, as though Rohan had seen beyond the performance into the person. The judges gave their comments, praising his originality, his emotional depth. Tashi nodded politely, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying that moment of connection. He told himself it was nothing, producers looked at contestants all the time. But deep inside, he knew this was different. There had been a spark, subtle yet undeniable, a recognition that went beyond the stage. That night, in his small rented room, Tashi replayed the day endlessly. He lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazily, his body aching from exertion but his mind restless. He thought of his family back home, their pride and worry, their hopes pinned on his success. He thought of the competition ahead, the battles he would have to fight. And then, inevitably, he thought of Rohan, the way his presence filled the room, the way his gaze had lingered. It was absurd, he told himself. Rohan was a producer, a professional, someone far removed from the contestants' world. Yet the memory of those eyes refused to fade. Sleep came late, and with it dreams of dancing under lights that turned into stars, of reaching out and finding someone waiting in the shadows. When he woke, the city was already alive with noise, but inside him there was a quiet certainty. The show had begun, yes, but so had something else, something far more dangerous than competition. The possibility of love had stepped onto the stage, and Tashi knew it would change everything. The rehearsal hall was alive with chaos the next morning, music blasting from speakers, dancers practicing in corners, fragments of choreography colliding like sparks. Tashi arrived early, his body still sore from the audition but his spirit restless. He stretched quietly, watching the others. Some were already forming alliances, whispering strategies, laughing in tight circles. He felt the familiar pang of being an outsider, the boy from the hills who had never belonged to such polished worlds. Yet he reminded himself, he was here because of his dance, and that was enough. The day's schedule was grueling. Contestants were divided into groups, each assigned a mentor to prepare for the first round. Cameras followed them relentlessly, capturing every stumble, every smile, every flicker of doubt. Tashi's group was tasked with a contemporary piece, blending raw emotion with technical precision. He threw himself into the choreography, his movements sharp yet fluid, his body learning to adapt to the rhythm of others. Still, he felt the weight of eyes on him, not just the cameras but something more. During a break, he noticed Rohan standing near the monitors, speaking with the directors. His voice was calm, his gestures economical, yet his presence filled the room. Tashi tried not to stare, but his gaze betrayed him. At one point, Rohan glanced up, and their eyes met across the hall. It was only a second, but it was enough to send a ripple through Tashi's chest. He looked away quickly, pretending to adjust his shoes, but the warmth lingered. The rehearsals stretched into evening. Exhaustion painted every face, but Tashi kept pushing, driven by something beyond competition. He wanted to prove himself, yes, but he also wanted to be seen, not just as a contestant, but as someone whose dance carried truth. When the mentors dismissed them, he stayed behind, practicing alone in front of the mirrors. His reflection stared back, sweat-soaked and weary, yet alive with determination. He moved through the steps again, slower this time, letting each gesture breathe. In the silence, he felt freer, as though the mirrors were listening. "Tashi," a voice said, breaking the quiet. He turned, startled. Rohan stood at the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light. For a moment, Tashi couldn't speak. He hadn't expected him here, not now, not alone. "You dance differently when no one's watching," Rohan said, stepping inside. His tone was even, but there was a softness beneath it. "It's more honest." Tashi swallowed, his throat dry. I guess it's easier when I don't feel the cameras." Rohan nodded, his gaze steady. "That honesty is what makes you stand out. Don't lose it in the noise of the show." The words struck Tashi like a chord, resonating deep within. He wanted to ask why Rohan had noticed, why he had bothered to say it, but the questions tangled in his chest. Instead, he nodded, murmuring, "Thank you." Rohan gave a faint smile, then turned to leave, his footsteps fading into the corridor. Tashi stood frozen, his heart pounding, the echo of that brief encounter filling the room. That night, he couldn't sleep. He replayed the moment endlessly, the way Rohan had spoken, the way his eyes had held him. It wasn't just encouragement. It felt personal, intimate, as though Rohan had seen something no one else had. Tashi lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between exhilaration and fear. He knew he shouldn't think this way. Rohan was the producer, the man who controlled the show, the one who decided fates. To feel anything beyond respect was dangerous. Yet the thought of him lingered, stubborn and undeniable. The next day brought the first elimination round. The studio buzzed with tension, contestants rehearsing frantically, mentors shouting corrections. Tashi's group performed their piece under the glare of lights, every movement scrutinized by judges and cameras. He danced with all he had, channeling the honesty Rohan had spoken of, letting his body tell the story of longing and resilience. When the performance ended, applause filled the hall. The judges praised his emotional depth, noting how he carried the group's energy. Relief washed over him, but beneath it was something else, a quiet pride that Rohan had seen him, had believed in him. As contestants gathered for results, Tashi scanned the room. Rohan stood near the judges, his expression composed, his eyes unreadable. Yet when Tashi's name was announced as safe, he thought he saw the faintest flicker of satisfaction cross Rohan's face. It was gone in an instant, but it was enough to make Tashi's heart race. Later, in the dressing room, the contestants celebrated, some crying with relief, others consoling those eliminated. Tashi joined briefly, but his mind was elsewhere. He slipped out quietly, walking down the corridor, his footsteps echoing. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed space. As he turned a corner, he saw Rohan again, speaking with a cameraman. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the noise of the world faded. Tashi felt the pull again, stronger this time, undeniable. He walked past, forcing himself not to linger, but inside he knew something had begun between them, something fragile yet powerful. The show was about competition, about survival, but for Tashi, it was becoming about more. It was about the quiet moments, the glances, the words that carried weight. It was about Rohan and the possibility of love that danced just beyond reach. The competition hall pulsed with energy, brighter and louder than ever. The first elimination had sharpened everyone's focus, and now every dancer moved with a kind of desperation, as though each step could be their last chance. Tashi felt the tension pressing against his skin, but he carried himself with quiet determination. He had survived the first round, and that survival had given him confidence. Still, he knew the road ahead would be merciless. The mentors announced the next challenge, duets. Each contestant would be paired with another, and together they would have to create a performance that blended their styles seamlessly. The announcement sent ripples of excitement and dread through the room. Partnerships could make or break reputations. Tashi was paired with Arav, a dancer from Mumbai known for his sharp technique and competitive edge. Arav greeted him with a polite smile, but Tashi sensed the calculation behind it. This was not friendship, this was strategy. Their rehearsals began awkwardly. Arav's movements were precise, almost mechanical, while Tashi's flowed with emotion and softness. They clashed at first, their rhythms refusing to merge. Arav grew impatient, correcting Tashi brusquely, while Tashi struggled to adapt without losing his essence. Cameras hovered, capturing every disagreement, every sigh. The pressure mounted, and Tashi wondered if he could survive this round. One evening, after hours of rehearsal, Tashi stayed behind again, practicing alone. He moved through the duet steps, trying to find a way to bridge the gap between Arav's sharpness and his own fluidity. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice Rohan entering until he heard his voice. "You're trying too hard to fit into someone else's rhythm," Rohan said, his tone calm but firm. Tashi froze, turning to face him. "But if I don't, the duet won't work." Rohan stepped closer, his gaze steady. "The duet will work if you bring your truth into it. Don't erase yourself. Find the balance, but don't lose what makes you different." The words sank into Tashi, like water into dry earth. He nodded slowly, realizing that he had been compromising too much, trying to mold himself into Arav's style instead of finding harmony. "I'll try," he whispered. Rohan's lips curved into the faintest smile. "That's all you need to do." He lingered for a moment, as though wanting to say more, then turned and left. Tashi stood in the silence, his heart pounding, the echo of Rohan's presence filling the room. The next day, Tashi approached Arav with renewed clarity. He suggested adjustments, weaving emotion into their sharp choreography, softening edges without dulling them. Arav resisted at first, but as they rehearsed, he began to see the power in Tashi's approach. Slowly, their movements began to merge, sharpness and softness intertwining like threads in a tapestry. The duet transformed from conflict into dialogue, each dancer complementing the other. When they performed on stage, the audience felt the tension and resolution in every step. Arif's precision cut through the air, while Tashi's fluidity wrapped around it, creating a dance that was both fierce and tender. The judges praised their chemistry, noting how the contrast had become the strength of the piece. Relief washed over Tashi, but beneath it was something deeper, a quiet pride that he had held onto himself, guided by Rohan's words. Backstage, Arif congratulated him, his competitive edge softened for once. "You were right," he admitted. "Your style made the difference." Tashi smiled, grateful for the acknowledgement, but his thoughts drifted elsewhere. He scanned the room, searching for Rohan. When he found him, standing near the monitors, their eyes met briefly. No words were exchanged, but the connection was undeniable. That night, Tashi lay awake again, his body exhausted but his mind restless. He thought of the duet, of the way his movements had carried emotion, of the way Rohan had seen him when no one else had. It was about the quiet moments, the glances, the words that lingered. It was about Rohan and the possibility of love that grew stronger with every encounter. The announcement of the next challenge sent a wave of murmurs through the contestants' group performances. Unlike duets, these demanded not only technical skill but also teamwork, patience, and the ability to shine without overshadowing others. For many, it was a chance to prove leadership. For others, it was a test of survival. Tashi felt a mix of excitement and dread. He thrived on emotion and storytelling, but group dynamics could be unpredictable. His group consisted of 5 dancers, each with distinct styles: hip-hop, classical, jazz, contemporary, and Tashi's own fusion of traditional and modern. The mentors instructed them to create a piece that showcased unity while allowing individuality to breathe. Easier said than done. Arguments erupted quickly, egos clashed, and rehearsals became battlegrounds. Tashi tried to mediate, suggesting ways to blend movements, but his quiet voice was often drowned out by louder ones. Arif, now emboldened by his duet success, pushed aggressively for dominance. "We need sharp lines, strong visuals," he insisted. "No one cares about soft emotions in a group piece." Others nodded, but Tashi felt the sting of dismissal. He wanted to protest, to argue that emotion was what connected audiences, but he held back, unsure if anyone would listen. That evening, frustrated, he stayed behind again, practicing alone. He moved through fragments of choreography, trying to imagine how the group could find harmony. His body told stories of conflict, of voices clashing, of the struggle to be heard. He didn't notice Rohan until he spoke. "You look like you're fighting ghosts," Rohan said, stepping into the hall. Tashi froze, then smiled faintly. "Maybe I am. It's hard to make everyone listen." Rohan's gaze softened. Leadership isn't always about being the loudest. Sometimes it's about holding your ground quietly, making others see the value in what you bring. The words struck Tashi deeply. He nodded, murmuring, "I'll try." Rohan lingered, watching him move. For a moment, the silence between them felt charged, filled with something unspoken. Then he turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the corridor. Tashi stood still, his heart racing, the encounter etched into him like a secret. The next day, Tashi approached the group with renewed clarity. He suggested weaving emotion into the sharp lines Arif wanted, creating moments of softness that contrasted with strength. At first, they resisted, but as they rehearsed, they began to see the power of the blend. Slowly, the piece transformed, becoming a dialogue of styles rather than a battle. Tashi's quiet persistence had shifted the rhythm. When they performed on stage, the audience felt the unity and individuality, the clash and resolution. The judges praised the balance, noting how the piece carried both strength and emotion. Relief washed over Tashi, but beneath it was something deeper, a quiet pride that he had held onto himself, guided once again by Rohan's words. Backstage, tension simmered. Arif congratulated him grudgingly, acknowledging his influence. Others began to see him differently, not just as the quiet outsider, but as someone who could shape performances. Yet with recognition came jealousy. Whispers spread, some questioning how Tashi managed to stand out, others hinting at favoritism. He ignored them, but the weight of suspicion pressed against him. Later, as he walked down the corridor, he saw Rohan again, speaking with the director. No words were exchanged, but the connection was undeniable. He walked past, forcing himself not to linger, but inside he knew the bond was growing, fragile yet powerful, impossible to ignore. That night, lying awake, he thought of the performance, the whispers, the glances. The announcement of the solo round sent a shiver through the contestants. Group performances had offered safety in numbers, duets had allowed balance, but solos stripped everything away. It was just the dancer, the music, and the audience. No one to hide behind, no one to share the spotlight. For Tashi, it was both terrifying and exhilarating. This was the chance to show his essence, to dance not just with skill, but with soul. The mentors explained the theme, identity. Each contestant had to create a piece that revealed who they were beyond technique, beyond competition. The room buzzed with nervous energy as dancers scribbled ideas, tested movements, and argued with themselves. Tashi sat quietly, his mind drifting back to the hills of Arunachal, to the festivals where he had first discovered rhythm, to the nights when he danced alone under the stars. Identity, for him, was not just about being a dancer. It was about being a boy who carried his home in his movements, who turned silence into stories. He began rehearsing, weaving traditional gestures into contemporary flow, creating a piece that spoke of belonging and longing. His body told of bamboo groves swaying, of drums echoing through valleys, of leaving home to chase dreams. Yet beneath it all, another layer emerged, his growing feelings for Rohan, the quiet pull that had begun to shape his journey. He didn't name it, didn't dare, but it seeped into his movements, into the pauses and glances, into the vulnerability of his dance. During one rehearsal, he noticed Rohan watching from the shadows near the monitors. Their eyes met briefly, and Tashi felt exposed, as though his dance had revealed too much. He faltered, then recovered, finishing the piece with trembling hands. When the music ended, Rohan stepped forward. "You're telling a story that feels personal," he said, his voice calm but edged with curiosity. "Don't be afraid of that. Audiences connect to honesty more than perfection. But what if it's too personal? Then it will be unforgettable." The words lingered long after Rohan left. Tashi replayed them endlessly, wondering if Rohan understood what he was truly revealing. His dance was not just about identity, it was about desire, about connection, about the possibility of love that had taken root in silence. The day of the solo round arrived. The music began, soft and haunting, and he let go. His body became memory, each gesture a fragment of his past, each leap a fragment of his longing. He danced of home, of departure, of dreams, and of something unnamed that burned quietly inside him. Then applause, rising like a wave, carrying him higher than he had ever imagined. The judges praised his authenticity, his vulnerability, his ability to make the audience feel. Tashi bowed, his chest heaving, his eyes searching instinctively for Rohan. He found him at the edge of the stage, arms folded, expression composed. Yet his eyes, those eyes, held something that made Tashi's breath catch. It was not just approval, it was recognition. Backstage, contestants congratulated him, some sincerely, others grudgingly. Whispers spread again, some admiring, others envious. Tashi ignored them, his mind consumed by the performance, by the way Rohan had looked at him. He knew he was treading dangerous ground, but he couldn't stop himself. The show was about competition, yes, but for him it was becoming about something more. It was about the solitary stage, the honesty of movement, and the bond that grew stronger with every glance. That night, lying awake, he thought of the performance, of the applause, of Rohan's words. He knew the road ahead would be harder, filled with rivalry and suspicion, but he also knew that something had begun, fragile yet undeniable. The possibility of love had stepped into the spotlight, and Tashi could no longer pretend it wasn't there. The studio had changed. The air was heavier, the smiles tighter, the laughter edged with suspicion. With each round, The competition stripped away layers of camaraderie, leaving behind raw ambition. Contestants who once shared snacks and encouragement now measured each other with calculating eyes. Tashi felt the shift keenly. He had survived, yes, but survival came at a cost. The mentors announced the next challenge: freestyle battles. Each dancer would face another in a head-to-head performance, improvising to music chosen at random. It was a test of adaptability, creativity, and nerve. The announcement sent a ripple of anxiety through the room. For Tashi, it was daunting. He thrived on storytelling, on carefully crafted emotion, not on sudden bursts of improvisation. Yet he knew he had no choice. His opponent was Arav. The pairing felt deliberate, almost cruel. Arav's sharp technique and competitive fire made him a formidable rival. Whispers spread quickly. This battle would be one to watch. Cameras hovered, eager to capture sparks. Tashi felt the weight of expectation pressing against him, but beneath it was something else, the quiet memory of Rohan's words, urging him to hold on to honesty. The battle began. The music shifted unpredictably, from pounding bass to haunting strings. Arav attacked each beat with precision, his movements sharp and commanding. The audience cheered, impressed by his control. Tashi stepped forward, his body trembling with nerves, then let go. He moved not with aggression but with vulnerability, weaving emotion into improvisation, turning uncertainty into story. His dance spoke of struggle, of resilience, of finding beauty in chaos. The crowd responded differently. Some cheered Arav's dominance, others leaned into Tashi's quiet intensity. The judges watched closely, their expressions unreadable. When the battle ended, applause filled the hall, divided but strong. The judges deliberated, then announced Tashi as the winner. Shock rippled through the room. Arav's face tightened, his jaw clenched, but he forced a smile. Whispers spread again, louder this time. Backstage, the atmosphere was tense. Some congratulated Tashi, others muttered about favoritism. "How does he keep winning?" one contestant whispered. "It's like the producer has a soft spot for him." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they carried a dangerous truth. Tashi knew his connection with Rohan was subtle, unspoken, but others were beginning to notice. Later, as he walked down the corridor, he saw Rohan speaking with the director. Their eyes met briefly, and Tashi felt the pull stronger than ever. He wanted to linger, to speak, to ask questions, but he forced himself to keep walking. The whispers were already dangerous. Any visible closeness would only fuel them. Yet inside, he knew. The bond was growing, fragile yet undeniable. That night, lying awake, he thought of the battle, of Arav's anger, of the whispers. The show was about survival, yes, but for him, it was becoming about love, the kind that danced in shadows, waiting to step into the light. The studio buzzed with anticipation. Each round had stripped away layers of pretense, leaving behind raw ambition and fragile nerves. Contestants whispered in corners, alliances shifting like shadows. Tashi felt the weight of eyes on him more than ever. His victories had earned respect, but also suspicion. Whispers followed him, too much attention from the producer, too many close calls that ended in his favor. The next challenge was announced: fusion performances. Each contestant had to blend two contrasting dance styles into a single piece, a test of creativity and adaptability. Tashi chose to merge traditional Northeastern folk with contemporary jazz, a daring combination that reflected both his roots and his growth. He threw himself into rehearsals, weaving bamboo-inspired gestures into fluid spins, creating a piece that felt like home and city colliding. Arav, still stung from his loss in the freestyle battle, began to spread rumors. "Tashi's getting special treatment," he muttered to others. "You think it's coincidence the producer keeps showing up when he's rehearsing?" The words spread quickly, feeding insecurities, planting seeds of doubt. Some contestants avoided Tashi, others confronted him with veiled remarks. He tried to ignore it, but the sting was real. One evening, exhausted from rehearsal, Tashi found himself alone in the corridor. Rohan appeared suddenly, his presence filling the space. Their eyes met, and Tashi felt the familiar pull, stronger now, almost unbearable. "You're hearing the whispers," Rohan said quietly. Tashi hesitated, then nodded. They think I'm getting help. That you're favoring me." Rohan's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Do you believe that?" Tashi's heart raced. "But I don't know how to stop them from believing it." Rohan stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "You don't need to stop them. You need to dance so honestly that no one can deny you deserve to be here. Let your truth silence them." The words struck Tashi deeply, but the closeness, the intensity of Rohan's gaze, made his chest tighten. He wanted to say more, to confess the feelings that had been growing inside him, but fear held him back. The walls had ears, and the whispers were already dangerous. The day of the fusion performance arrived. The studio was tense, the audience waiting, the judges poised. The music began, and he let go. His body became a bridge between worlds, weaving tradition into modernity, roots into wings. He danced of home and departure, of longing and belonging, of truth that refused to be silenced. The judges praised his originality, his courage, his ability to merge styles seamlessly. Relief washed over him, but beneath it was something deeper, a quiet pride that he had held onto himself, guided once again by Rohan's words. Backstage, however, the whispers did not fade. Arav confronted him directly, his voice sharp. "You think no one sees it? The way he looks at you? The way you keep winning? This isn't just about dance anymore." He wanted to protest, to deny, but the words tangled in his throat. He knew Arav was wrong, but he also knew the danger of perception. The bond between him and Rohan was fragile, unspoken, but it was becoming harder to hide. That night, lying awake, he thought of the performance, of the applause, of Arav's words. He knew the competition was becoming more ruthless, but he also knew that something else was unfolding, something far more dangerous and beautiful. The studio was no longer just a stage. It had become a battlefield of ambition and suspicion. Every smile carried sharp edges, every compliment hid calculation. Tashi felt the weight of whispers pressing against him, louder now, more dangerous. Contestants eyed him with a mix of envy and resentment, their voices carrying rumors that spread like wildfire. The mentors announced the next challenge, themed performances inspired by emotions. Each contestant had to embody an emotion, joy, anger, sorrow, love, and translate it into dance. Tashi was assigned longing. The irony was not lost on him. Longing was the emotion that had been consuming him silently, shaping his movements, haunting his nights. He poured himself into rehearsals, weaving gestures of reaching, of waiting, of desire unfulfilled. His body became confession, his dance a secret letter written in motion. But the whispers grew louder. Arav, relentless in his rivalry, cornered him backstage one evening. "Everyone sees it," he hissed. "The way he looks at you, the way you keep winning. Do you think you can hide it forever?" "It's not what you think," he said, his voice trembling. Arav smirked. "Then prove it, because if you don't, I will." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Tashi walked away, his heart pounding, fear gnawing at him. He knew Arav was dangerous, not just as a rival, but as someone willing to expose what should remain hidden. The day of the performance arrived. The studio was hushed, the audience waiting, the judges poised. Tashi stepped onto the stage, the lights blinding, the floor humming beneath his feet. The music began, soft and aching, and he let go. His body became longing itself, hands reaching, steps faltering, eyes searching. He danced of desire unspoken, of connection denied, of love that lived in shadows. Every movement was a confession, every pause a plea. When the piece ended, silence filled the hall. Then applause, rising like a wave, carrying him higher than ever. The judges praised his vulnerability, his ability to embody longing so completely. Relief washed over him, but beneath it was something deeper, a quiet terror that he had revealed too much. Backstage, the whispers erupted into scandal. Arav had spoken to a journalist covering the show, hinting at favoritism, at a secret bond between contestant and producer. The story spread quickly, feeding the flames of suspicion. Contestants confronted Tashi, their voices sharp, their eyes accusing. "Is it true?" they demanded. "Are you getting help? Is this why you keep winning?" Tashi froze, his chest tightening. He wanted to deny, to protest, but the words tangled in his throat. He knew the truth was dangerous, but silence was worse. Rohan appeared suddenly, his presence cutting through the chaos. His voice was calm but firm. "Enough," he said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "This competition is about dance, not rumors. Tashi has earned his place here." The words silenced the room, but the tension lingered. Tashi felt the weight of Rohan's defense, the risk he had taken, the truth that hovered between them. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, everything was exposed, not to the world, but to each other. That night, lying awake, Tashi thought of the performance, of the applause, of the scandal. He knew the competition was becoming more ruthless, but he also knew that something else had been revealed, something far more dangerous and beautiful. The scandal refused to fade. The whispers had grown into headlines, the rumors into speculation. Journalists circled the studio like vultures, contestants eyed Tashi with suspicion, and even the mentors seemed wary. Every step he took felt heavier, every glance sharper. The competition was no longer just about dance, it was about survival in a storm of doubt. Tashi tried to focus on rehearsals, but the weight of accusation pressed against him. His movements faltered, his confidence wavered. He felt exposed, as though every gesture carried hidden meaning. The cameras seemed hungrier, eager to capture cracks in his composure. He wanted to disappear, to escape the noise, but the stage demanded presence. One evening, after a grueling rehearsal, he slipped away into a quiet corridor. The studio was dim, the hum of equipment fading into silence. He leaned against the wall, his chest tight, his breath uneven. He closed his eyes, wishing for the hills of Arunachal, for the simplicity of dancing under stars without judgment. "Tashi," a voice said softly. He opened his eyes. Rohan stood before him, his presence filling the space. For a moment neither spoke. The silence was charged, heavy with everything unspoken. Then Rohan stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You're carrying too much," he said quietly. "The whispers, the scandal, they're crushing you." Tashi swallowed, his throat tight. They think I'm here because of you. That I don't deserve this." Rohan's jaw tightened. "You deserve every step you've taken. You've earned it. Don't let them take that from you." Tashi's chest ached. But what if they're right? What if I can't separate what I feel from what I dance? The words hung in the air, trembling with vulnerability. Rohan's eyes softened, his voice low. "What do you feel?" Tashi's breath caught. He wanted to deny, to hide, but the truth pressed against him, demanding release. I feel like every time you look at me, I'm seen. Not as a contestant, not as a dancer, but as myself. And I don't know how to stop that from becoming part of my dance." The confession hung between them, fragile yet undeniable. "And what if I don't want you to stop?" he said quietly. Tashi's chest tightened, his heart pounding. The world seemed to fade, the whispers silenced, the scandal forgotten. It was just them, standing in the quiet corridor, the truth finally spoken. Rohan stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is dangerous. For you, for me, for the show. But I can't pretend I don't see you. I can't pretend I don't feel it too." Tashi's breath trembled. "Then what do we do?" Rohan's gaze was steady, his voice firm. "We dance. You keep dancing with honesty, with truth. Let the world see that you deserve to be here. And whatever this is, whatever we are, we hold it quietly until the time is right." He nodded, his chest aching with relief and fear. For the first time, the bond between them had stepped out of shadows, spoken aloud, acknowledged. It was dangerous, yes, but it was also undeniable. That night, lying awake, Tashi thought of the corridor, of the confession, of Rohan's words. He knew the road ahead would be harder, filled with rivalry and suspicion, but he also knew that something had begun, fragile yet unbreakable. The show was about survival, yes, but for him, it was becoming about love, the kind that could shatter everything if exposed, yet the kind he could no longer deny. The studio had never felt so alive. The finale was here, the culmination of weeks of sweat, rivalry, whispers, and confessions. The air vibrated with anticipation, the audience restless, the judges poised. Contestants stood on edge, each carrying the weight of dreams and fears. For Tashi, it was more than a competition. It was the stage where his truth would finally be revealed. The theme of the finale was freedom. Each dancer had to create a piece that embodied liberation, not just in movement, but in meaning. Tashi knew instantly what his freedom was. It was not just about breaking chains of doubt or proving himself worthy. It was about love, the kind he had carried in silence, the kind that had shaped his journey, the kind that had finally been spoken in whispers behind closed doors. He rehearsed tirelessly, weaving gestures of release and flight, of breaking barriers and reaching for light. His body became a story of confinement and escape, of longing and fulfillment. Every step carried the weight of his journey, from the hills of Arunachal to the glare of studio lights, from loneliness to connection, from silence to confession. The night of the finale arrived. The studio was packed, the cameras hungry, the audience electric. Contestants performed one by one, each pouring themselves into the theme. The applause was thunderous, the tension mounting. Finally, it was Tashi's turn. He stepped onto the stage, the lights blinding, the floor humming beneath his feet. The music began, soaring and expansive, and he let go. His body became freedom itself, arms reaching skyward, steps breaking boundaries, leaps carrying him beyond gravity. He danced of home and departure, of whispers and confessions, of love that had lived in shadows and now demanded light. Every movement was a declaration, every pause a promise. The audience was silent, captivated. The judges leaned forward, their eyes wide. When the piece ended, the silence lingered, heavy and profound. Then applause erupted, rising like a storm, carrying him higher than he had ever imagined. Backstage, chaos reigned, contestants crying, mentors consoling, cameras chasing reactions. Tashi stood still, his chest heaving, his heart pounding. He searched instinctively for Rohan, and when he found him, their eyes met. No words were needed. The truth was there, undeniable, unbreakable. The results were announced. Tashi had won. The studio erupted in cheers, confetti raining down, cameras flashing. He bowed, tears in his eyes, his body trembling with relief and joy. But beneath the celebration was something deeper, the quiet certainty that his victory was not just about dance. It was about truth, about love, about freedom. Later, away from the chaos, he found Rohan waiting in the corridor. Their eyes met, and for the first time, there was no fear, no hesitation. Rohan stepped closer, his voice soft but steady. "You danced your truth tonight, and now it's ours." Tashi's chest ached with emotion. He nodded, his breath trembling. "I don't want to hide anymore." Rohan's gaze held him, steady and unflinching. "Then we won't." The words wrapped around Tashi like a promise, fragile yet powerful. He felt the weight of the world lift, replaced by the lightness of freedom. The show had been about survival, yes, but for him, it had become about love, the kind that had stepped out of shadows, into the spotlight, unafraid and undeniable. As they walked out together, the noise of the studio fading behind them, Tashi knew his journey had only just begun. The stage had given him victory, but love had given him freedom. And in that freedom, he found himself, whole, seen, and unafraid. The bus wound its way through the misty hills of Arunachal Pradesh, carrying Tashi back to the place where his journey had begun. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the familiar rhythm of the landscape filled him with both comfort and anticipation. He had left these hills as a dreamer, uncertain and hungry. Now he returned as a champion, his name whispered across the country. By the time he reached the village square, the news of his victory had already arrived. The entire community had gathered, Elders in traditional attire, children clutching bamboo sticks, neighbors with drums slung over their shoulders. The square pulsed with life, a festival born not of harvest but of pride. As he stepped down, a cheer erupted. Scarves were draped around his neck, hands reached out to touch him, and voices rose in song. The dull drums thundered, and dancers began the bamboo steps of Chura, their movements precise and joyous. Tashi stood in the center, overwhelmed. He had imagined this moment countless times, but reality was far richer, far heavier. His mother's eyes glistened as she embraced him. "You carried us with you," she whispered. "Every step you danced, we were there." His father, usually reserved, placed a hand on his shoulder, pride shining through silence. Yet beneath the celebration, Tashi felt a quiet ache. Rohan was not here. The producer had stayed behind in the city, bound by contracts and obligations. Tashi smiled through the festivities, but his heart searched for the one gaze missing from the crowd. That evening, as the celebrations wound down, Tashi sat by the fire with his childhood friends. They teased him, mimicked his stage moves, and asked endless questions about the show. Was it true you danced with Bollywood stars? Did the judges really cry? And what about the rumors? Tashi laughed, deflecting, but the last question lingered. Rumors had followed him home, whispers of favoritism, of a bond with the producer. He felt the weight of it pressing against him even here, in the safety of his village. Later, alone in his room, he lay awake listening to the distant drums. A message from Rohan. "I saw the celebrations online. You look radiant. I wish I was there." Tashi's chest tightened. He typed back quickly. "I wish you were too." The reply came almost instantly. Soon. He closed his eyes, the ache easing slightly. The hills had welcomed him home, his people had embraced him, but his heart knew the journey was not complete. The stage had given him victory, but love was waiting, somewhere between the city and these hills, ready to step into the light. The days after Tashi's homecoming were filled with invitations. Schools wanted him to perform, cultural centers asked him to speak, and newspapers carried his photograph under headlines like "The Boy Who Danced His Truth." Children followed him through the village square, mimicking his spins and leaps, while elders praised his courage and discipline. His family beamed with pride, their small home now a place of pilgrimage for neighbors eager to glimpse the champion. Yet beneath the celebration, whispers lingered. Some villagers, echoing the rumors that had swirled in the city, questioned whether his victory had been fair. Wasn't there talk of favoritism, they asked. Didn't the producer favor him? The words stung, not because they were new, but because they had followed him across miles, clinging like shadows. Tashi faced them calmly. At every gathering, he danced, not for judges or cameras, but for his people. He performed the bamboo-inspired steps of Chura, weaving them into contemporary arcs, his movements telling stories of struggle and triumph. His honesty was visible in every gesture, and slowly, suspicion gave way to admiration. One evening, he was invited to perform at a local festival. The stage was simple, a wooden platform lit by lanterns, but the crowd was immense. As the drums began, Tashi moved with fluid grace, his body narrating the journey from doubt to freedom. When he finished, silence hung heavy, followed by thunderous applause. Elders rose to bless him, children clapped wildly, and even those who had whispered doubts stood in awe. Later, by the river, Tashi rehearsed alone. The water shimmered under moonlight, and the hills echoed with distant drums. His phone buzzed. It was Rohan. Their conversation was brief, but charged. Rohan confessed the city felt emptier without him, that the studio seemed hollow. "I miss you," he said simply. "I miss you too," he whispered. The bond was alive even across distance. Yet Tashi knew the whispers would not vanish easily. His victory had made him a symbol, but symbols were always scrutinized. He resolved to keep dancing, to let his art speak louder than rumors. That night, lying awake, he thought of the stage, the applause, the whispers, and the voice that had steadied him across miles. He realized that his journey was no longer just about proving himself. It was about carrying truth, his own, and the truth of a love that had begun in shadows but refused to fade. The hills had grown quieter since the festival ended, but Tashi's days remained full. Invitations still arrived, though now he chose carefully, performing only when the cause felt meaningful. He wanted his art to be more than spectacle, it had to carry truth. Yet even as he danced for schools and cultural centers, his thoughts often drifted to the city, to the man whose absence weighed on him like a shadow. Then, one crisp morning, word spread through the village. A visitor had arrived. Tashi hurried to the square, his heart pounding. There, standing among curious villagers, was Rohan. He looked different outside the studio, less polished, more human. His black shirt was simple, his hair slightly tousled, his eyes searching. The villagers gathered quickly, intrigued. Who was this man from the city, walking beside their champion? Rohan greeted them with quiet respect, bowing to elders, listening intently as they spoke of traditions. He watched the bamboo dances with awe, his gaze lingering on the rhythm of the sticks, the precision of the steps. Tashi introduced him simply. "This is Rohan, my friend." The word felt both true and insufficient. In their glances, in the pauses between words, something deeper shimmered, something the villagers sensed but did not name. That evening, the two walked along the riverbank. The water glowed under the fading sun, and the air was thick with silence. Tashi stopped, his voice trembling. "Here, no cameras, no judges, no whispers. Just us." Rohan's reply was steady, his voice carrying the weight of choice. "And I choose us." The words hung between them, fragile yet powerful. Tashi felt his chest ache, his breath uneven. For the first time, their bond was not hidden in corridors or whispered in phone calls. It was spoken aloud, under the stars of his homeland. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments. Rohan joined village meals, listened to stories of ancestors, and even tried the bamboo dance, stumbling but laughing. The villagers warmed to him, seeing not a producer but a man who cared deeply for their champion. One night, during a small gathering, an elder spoke. "Your dance carries our spirit, Tashi. And this man, he sees it too. That is enough." The words were simple, but they felt like a blessing. For Tashi, the reunion was more than love rekindled. It was a merging of worlds, the city and the hills, the stage and the square, the whispers and the truth. He realized that his journey was not about leaving one behind for the other, but about carrying both forward, together. The weeks after Rohan's visit unfolded like a quiet dawn. The village had accepted him, not with fanfare but with warmth, and Tashi felt a new balance settling into his life. For the first time, the two worlds he belonged to, the hills of Arunachal and the city stage, were no longer at odds. They had begun to weave together, thread by thread. Opportunities blossomed quickly. Invitations arrived from across India, then from abroad. Cultural festivals in Europe wanted Tashi's fusion of northeastern folk and contemporary dance. Asian collaborations sought his unique storytelling style. His name was no longer just a contestant, it was becoming a brand, a symbol of authenticity. Rohan stood beside him through it all, not as a producer bound by contracts, but as a partner who believed in his vision. He handled logistics, spoke to organizers, and shielded Tashi from the noise of negotiations. But more than that, he listened. He listened to Tashi's ideas about blending bamboo rhythms with jazz, about choreographing stories of migration and belonging, about creating performances that carried the soul of his homeland into modern spaces. Together, they began shaping a new project, a dance company that celebrated roots while embracing modernity. Tashi wanted it to be more than performance. It had to be a movement, a platform for young dancers from the Northeast to tell their stories. Rohan, with his industry experience, helped structure the dream into reality. Their love, once hidden in shadows, now moved freely, like dance itself. They no longer whispered in corridors or exchanged hurried glances under stage lights. In the village, they walked side by side. In the city, they worked shoulder to shoulder. The world saw them not as scandal, but as story. Two men who had found truth in rhythm, freedom and love. One evening, as they rehearsed in a small studio, Tashi paused mid-step. "Do you ever think," he asked softly, "that all of this began with a single performance? One dance, one risk." Rohan smiled, his gaze steady. "And one choice. To believe in you." Tashi's chest tightened, his breath uneven. He realized that the stage had given him victory, but love had given him courage. Together, they were no longer chasing approval, they were building something lasting. Months later, their company debuted in Delhi. The performance was a fusion of chara bamboo rhythms, contemporary arcs, and jazz improvisations. The story was simple yet profound, a journey from doubt to freedom, from whispers to truth. The audience rose in thunderous applause, not just for the dance, but for the honesty it carried. As the curtain fell, Tashi and Rohan stood together, their hands brushing, their eyes meeting. The journey was far from over, but they had found their stage, a place where art and love could move as one. The stage was quiet now. No judges, no cameras, no whispers. Just the echo of footsteps and the memory of applause. Tashi stood at the center, his body still, his heart steady. Beside him, Rohan watched, not as a producer, not as a guardian of contracts, but as a partner who had walked through shadows into light. They had cleared their names, not with arguments, but with truth. Every performance, every gesture, every story told through dance had become proof of authenticity. What began as suspicion had transformed into admiration. What was once scandal had become story. In Arunachal, children now danced bamboo rhythms with pride, blending them with modern arcs, carrying forward the legacy Tashi had ignited. In Delhi, their company thrived, a space where young dancers found voice and courage. Abroad, audiences rose in thunderous applause, not just for the art, but for the honesty it carried. And in the quiet moments, by rivers, under stars, in rehearsal halls, they found each other again and again. Their love was no longer hidden, no longer whispered. It moved freely, like dance itself, unbound and unafraid. The journey had begun with a single performance, a risk taken on a crowded stage. It had carried them through doubt, through whispers, through distance. And now it ended not with a curtain fall, but with a beginning, two men, two worlds, one rhythm. As the lights dimmed, Tashi whispered, "This is our last dance." Rohan smiled, his voice steady.
"No.
This is our first." Please subscribe for more stories from BL Stories Land.